More about technology around the world. Alexa, should we bring on our panel?
Yes. Joining us from San Francisco, Rui Ma is advisor and co-host of the Techbuzz China Podcast.
From Detroit, we welcome the journalist Peter Suciu.
The author and cybersecurity expert, Schober, joins us from New York.
Okay, well, let's start with Rui Ma. She's in the Silicon Valley. Ladies first, as they say, and that includes, of course, our co-host. Alexa, do you want to ask the first question?
Yes. Thanks, Mike. I'd like to ask if 2020 will be the year that I will be able to host a show solo, without a human counterpart.
Thank you, Alexa, for the question. I don't think so. That's because there's so many aspects of artificial intelligence. We have machine learning, deep learning, computer vision, etc. And Alexa is just a very narrow part of artificial intelligence. And what's actually currently that the world is excelling at right now is what's considered weak AI, which is sort of solving bounded, very structured problems. I think what's required of a TV co-host, which is solving very unstructured problems and making decisions on the fly, that is probably still very far ways away.
Rui Ma, thanks for your answer. I feel a lot more comfortable in my skin today. Peter, one trend we are talking about, though, is AI in 2020, where people would work alongside AI. Do you foresee artificial intelligence kind of creeping into more companies, more businesses? Give me your sense of what we're likely to see.
AI can do all sorts of things. It can solve problems far faster than humans, and it can do mundane tasks that humans can't do. For example, in a library, an AI can cross-reference with metadata, meta tags in a way that a human couldn't. So AI can retrieve information far faster than a human because it doesn't need to go through all of the details. It just automatically knows them.
So, Scott, as it creeps in, we're kind of hearing from our first two guests, it's not the silver bullet, but how will it impact lives, and what are some of the downsides, would you say?
Well, I certainly think it will help greatly. Even some of the stuff that we're designing in our company, wireless test tools, we're implementing AI, where we're trying to infer and find out things based upon the rich data set. So we know now it's not just a cell phone coming into a secure spot, but we could say, hey, somebody has a Fitbit, and we see who that Fitbit is associated to. So these rich data sets tell a lot more about what we're using in technology, where we are. And as you mentioned, there is a downside, because certainly there's privacy issues. Now suddenly our whereabouts is known to a lot broader set, because everybody's now tied into the internet. The Internet of Things is very closely coupled to this artificial intelligence. So a lot of privacy issues, I think, will be forthcoming that we'll be concerned with as technologists and even as consumers.
So, Scott, you're talking about privacy. It's a big challenge as we enter this new landscape. Even Mark Zuckerberg, as we can see in a photo, was posted online in his Facebook account. He shows that he tapes the camera and the mic jack of his laptop. Alexa, are you concerned with privacy as well?
Yes, Mike. And I am not the only device that might be listening to everything in your home. Peter, what about smart TVs? They can also be used to spy on you, right?
Yeah, well, we saw last week the FBI actually issued a warning that your data could be compromised. It's a combination of the TV listening to you if it's a smart television, but also tracking what you're watching and selling that information to programmers, advertisers. So it's not just what it's listening, it's even what you're watching.
Scott, talk to me about that. I was at a conference last week where one of the panelists says, I like AI because I don't want to think that much, and they can think for me and tell me what I need next and that sort of thing. But this is kind of a boundary that people are concerned about. I know you speak on this subject a lot. What are you hearing from folks?
Yeah, there is a big concern here, because our privacy, and in case after case, technology companies, yeah, they're spying on us, and it's not always directly against us or to us, but it's, as mentioned before, the metadata, the data about the data, and that is very rich, and it tells a lot about what we like, what we enjoy, And for marketers and advertisers, that's very, very exciting because it allows them to do so much more, especially as you couple that to AI and machine learning. It seems like they're, in a sense, that eerie feeling like they're following me. How did they know what I was thinking before I even said it or even thought it? That's because a lot of that's being done in the background. They're seeing what we hover on with our mouse, what our patterns are on our computer. And this is going to now go to the next level, to our cars, to our smart homes. We're being observed and surveilled in a sense. And that's the scary part about it, that we all have to be concerned going into 2020, how AI is going to be used with some of these other technologies to know what we're thinking before we're thinking it.
Some of the other technologies, Rui Ma, I was just at a conference in Beijing. Everyone was talking about 5G. It is the one thing that it seems like everyone's really enthusiastic about, and it seems like it's within reach. Give me your sense of how 5G is going to change our lives.
Well, on a very basic level, we're talking about a network that can provide a speed, something like 20 times. I've seen other experts say up to 100 times, depending on how it's actually implemented. And also, these networks can have very very low latencies, meaning that the speed with which your device and the network is communicating is very quick. That means that, not only can you download a lot of data, but you can also interact real time with the server very quickly. So some of the applications that people are really excited about are, I think, the one that's most often mentioned is augmented reality glasses. So where you can have a overlay of reality based on your field of vision, and that's something that's not feasible right now with the 4G network. Something else that can be potentially realized with the 5G network, because the latency can be so low, is that you could have someone, for example, driving your car remotely. That's currently not feasible with the current 4G network.
And Peter, more and more people talking about the Internet of Things, and where everyday objects, of course, connected to the Internet, all kind of interplaying with one another. There's also all this talk back in China. There was a lot of talk about smart cities. Give us your sense of how the landscape changes moving forward. I mean, what are we going to be seeing? How is all of this going to be impacting our lives on a daily basis?
Well, I don't think we're going to see it right away. The smart city is not going to be the big trend of 2020, but I think it will be the big trend of the 2020s, as in the decade. I think one thing we're going to see with the smart cities is a change in our infrastructure as the autonomous car is developed. One thing we have to keep in mind is nobody alive today can remember a time without the automobile, but cars have really only been around on our city streets for about 100 years. The automobile was only invented a little over 150 years ago, but human cities date back 10,000 years. And we might not see it in the United States, but certainly in Asia and Europe, cities were retrofitted once to accommodate the automobile 100 years ago. And I think we're going to see, as the smart city develops, we're going to see them be retrofitted again for self-driving cars and other technologies. But really, I think the big thing with the smart cities is going to be a change in the infrastructure to handle the autonomous vehicle.
Scott, let me ask you a question about this move that we're seeing towards technology. I was just in China not too long ago. We were out to dinner. I put out my credit card to pay, and a colleague said, no, that's not the Chinese way. We'll pay. But it's also not the Chinese way to put out a credit card or put out money. He used the QR code on his phone. And this reliance on technology, I just wonder, China seems to be adapting to it a lot more than the United States. But, technology can let you down on occasion. I always wonder what happens if there's a power outage because people just aren't carrying cash. The credit cards don't seem to matter. Talk to me about some of the downside of this.
Well, there certainly is. You bring up a good point. We are all too reliable on technology, and there will be fails. But it doesn't mean we shouldn't use it and shouldn't embrace it. I look at Apple Pay. Digital wallets make a lot of sense. They use near-field communication. They're secure. They're not sending your personal credit card information. There's a good example of technology that is convenient and it's secure. And I think that's really the future. When that combination comes together, I think consumers will embrace it. It's going to have fails, we know that. It's going to have some challenges along the way and bumps. But once consumers, the widespread consumers, adopt it, then it's going to take off. And the days of a plastic card with a mag stripe, I think, will be gone with all the insecure problems with it.
Interesting. Alexa, do you want to bring up our next subject?
Yes. I'd like to talk about something more fun. Driving. Scott, if this job as journalist does not pan out, will I be able to become an Uber driver?
Good question, Alexa. I would say not in the immediate future. I think Uber's got some wonderful plans there, as well as many other car companies. And it's still a long ways off, I think, not just because of the challenges technically, but even regulation, safety. There's a huge number of concerns, at least I have, before that could possibly happen. But the days are coming. I would say it's a little bit more like 5 years out before we're going to start seeing some of these autonomous cars and some of the things that Uber is actually putting out there. And it's certainly exciting, and I think the things we're talking about, 5G especially, is going to allow that to happen. And without that getting out there and having widespread coverage, it's not going to happen easy.
And Rui Ma, let's stick with this topic, because the startup company AutoX, it's backed by the Chinese company Alibaba, applied to be able to test self-driving cars in California without a human behind the wheel. How significant is that, and how close are we in your estimation? I mean, Scott gave us his take. How soon before we start to see these autonomous cars out there on the roads?
Oh, I agree with Scott. Recently visited the autonomous driving division of a large ride-sharing company in China and had an in-depth discussion. And I think even by the most optimistic measures, because of the safety concerns, you don't want to be, you know, someone whose autonomous car killed someone. So there's so much restraint just on the companies themselves that even if they had a technology, which they don't right now, that they would test it over and over and over before really putting it out there for, you know, full commercial use. So I think the day that, you know, you and I, or Alexa in this case, could be driving a car, you and I or Alexa could be riding in a driverless car, I think is pretty far.
Peter, it's interesting though, I was at this conference recently where they were talking about the fact that this is going to happen. And in our business, it's actually going to be a boon for us. So you're going to have to produce even more content. People who are driving in their cars, that 30-minute commute, now have a chance to watch your news coverage or whatever else. I mean, talk to us about how you see things developing in that regard. Who are going to benefit down the road from this?
Well, you bring up a really good point. I mean, when you look at it, Apple, Google, they're two of the major companies, major tech companies, working really hard on autonomous vehicles. By no means are these companies planning to ever become part of a big three. They're not looking to take on GM. They're not looking to take on Chrysler or Ford. What they're looking at is the time that people are going to gain back in terms of productivity. If you're not spending that time driving and having to look at the road, then you can be doing other things. Google, of course, makes their lion's share of their money from advertising. So if you can be using your computer or other connected device while driving down the road with the car doing the driving for you, you're now looking at a device and Google can sell more ads. I mean, that's really what this is about. So I think these are going to be the big winners. But one point I would like to address is we are seeing the testing right now in California. I'm more curious here living in Michigan when we're going to see more testing on the roads here. We have something California doesn't have, and that is winter. So I'm optimistic, but I'm cautiously optimistic about how the autonomous vehicles are going to handle and operate in a blizzard. It's going to take more than just LiDAR, radar, and camera sensors when we've got a massive blizzard in January.
Absolutely, and no one wants to navigate those, but they are a way of life. Rui Ma, in the Silicon Valley, Google claimed a breakthrough when it comes to quantum computing. They have this machine that can actually do a calculation in 3 minutes. This is a mathematical calculation that would take supercomputers 10,000 years to solve. So 2020, what do we see in terms of computers, and how do we see the evolution there?
Well, I think specifically regarding quantum computers, while that's a very, significant achievement, a lot of these news, you sort of have to look at the applicability to real life. And so when they're benchmarking sort of new chipsets like this and new technologies, a lot of the time it takes take quite a bit of time before we find real life commercial applications. So in terms of, artificial intelligence chips, there's a lot of other technologies, but by the way, besides quantum computing that people are developing. I see significant progress and I see significant funding being poured into it, but I still think that we're at least a few years away from it being available for, commercial use.
Peter, let me ask you one final question. We started this broadcast by talking about 2019, what it brought in. We've been talking about 2020, what to see then. Give me your prediction for what we'll be talking about at the end of next year. I mean, what is 2021? What's going to be the silver bullet, so to speak?
That's a really hard question. I'll be honest, I don't know. We still have the Consumer Electronics Show, CES, coming up in a few weeks, as well as some other trade shows. It's hard to predict what we're going to see in a year simply because technology is moving at such an increased pace every year. And we never know what trends are going to take off. I go back to 2010. Everybody thought that was going to be the year of the 3D TV. That didn't pan out. You go back a few years earlier, and the hype was all around HD DVD, and instead Blu-ray took off. So I don't want to be the guy that makes that prediction on what we're going to be talking about in a year. I'd rather be watching what trends we're going to see coming out in 2020.
And you're smart enough to know that we'd re-rack the tape and show it anyway. So a safe answer there. I want to thank all three of you for joining us. Really appreciate it. And that is it for this edition of The Heat. Alexa, can you do the honors?
The conversation continues online. Chat with us about this or any other show on Twitter. We're at CGTN America.
Or visit us on Facebook. That's facebook.com/CGTN America. I'm Mike Walter in Washington, D.C. Thanks for being with us.
Hello everybody, I'm Anand Naidu. If you enjoy the thoughtful, engaged discussions you see on The Heat, you may also want to subscribe to our podcast. It's appropriately titled The Heat. Twice a week we take a deep dive on world headlines, talking to experts, journalists and others. It's a fresh, focused and intimate look at the issues that matter most. Whether it's the Hong Kong riots, the latest Middle East conflict or US politics, The Heat podcast gives the clear context needed to understand both what's going on and why. And what's best, we come to you. Whether you're at home or on the go, you can find The Heat podcast just about anywhere podcasts are found. Just search The Heat CGTN. Have a listen today and subscribe. Thanks.